Welcome back to World History. Today, we're learning about Chapter 7. Let's get into it. All right, so Chapter 7 is going to be the Hebrew or Jewish people, all right? And this is sort of the beginning of the Western civilization, okay? Judeo-Christian Western culture, however you want to phrase it. And it's a blend of Judaism and then what we learned from Rome and from Greece and things like that. So maybe some of these names will be familiar to you, maybe not. Let's get going. Okay, so we'll talk about some people from the Hebrew Bible, and their names are Abraham or Moses or David. These are the people we're going to learn about. And one thing we're going to learn about is a law code called the Ten Commandments. You might have heard of this. That's what I'm saying. If you've never heard of it, no worries. But I feel more students have heard the term Ten Commandments than have heard the term Hammurabi's Code. From a historical perspective, they're just different law codes. And what I want you to see is every society has a law code. Every society has a story, whether it's Ramayana or Iliad and Odyssey. Every society has buildings, and so here we go. This is sort of the beginning of some of the Western ideas, especially from the legal system, that we're going to treat people the same under the law. This all goes back to the Jewish culture. So compare Judaism with other world religions. Oh, here's another thing I want to mention. You go back 4,000 years ago, most, if not all, religions are polytheistic. What does that mean? Many gods, okay? We talked about Egypt, many gods. We talked about Hinduism, many gods. The history of the world is we start polytheistic and we're moving towards monotheistic. Mono means one, so we're talking about one God. The main world religions today, Christianity, Islam, etc., that's one God. And let's talk about how does Judaism impact our culture today, religiously, legally. All right. This is a new unit, a new chapter, a fresh start. Chance to do your best. If you did well on the last test, keep it up. If you want to get a better grade on the next one, start right now. Let's get going. Okay, here's your geography. You know on every test there's 3, 4, 5 questions about geography. You need to know some rivers, Euphrates and Jordan. You might know the Euphrates from our Mesopotamia. There's a sea right next to Israel called the Mediterranean Sea. Looks like a seahorse. If you remember that, great, you get it right again. If you didn't learn it last time, here's another chance to learn it, okay? That sea's not going anywhere, and it's pretty important. And when we go to Rome, guess what? Mediterranean Sea. So you might as well learn it right now, okay? Countries, Israel, Iran, Iraq, and Egypt. You should know a couple of those already. And then regions, Sinai Peninsula. Here's a map. I'll put up a little quiz. Don't forget to play the quiz. That way you learn where these regions are. And I'll, here on this map, I can show you the different countries, okay? So this one's Israel right here. There's Iraq, there's Iran, and there's Egypt, okay? And so if you don't have it down or if you need another map, this is where you can take you take the reins of your learning and look up some different maps, okay? Make sure you have it in your brain where you can find this on a map. Okay. So we're going to talk about Abraham in a minute, and he's going to go from Mesopotamia over to the land of Canaan. You can't cross the desert, especially if you're a shepherd. So the physical geography, human geography, you can follow the rivers up and around, and that's what he's going to do. And you can kind of figure that out without me telling you, oh yeah, if this guy's a shepherd and he's going to need some grass, he's going to need some water, he's going to want to stick by the river, he's going to come this way, if that makes sense. So, according to the Bible, Abraham's a shepherd. God tells him he needs to go from Mesopotamia to the land of Canaan. Okay, this is the beginning of the Jewish or Hebrew religion or culture. Hebrew is the language. Okay, so you don't speak Jewish, you speak Hebrew. But you can be called a Hebrew or a Jew. Those are words that describe the culture, okay, or the religion. Here's one route. Here's the other route. Basically, Tigris, Euphrates going up there. There's a famine in the land of Canaan. And so they go down to Egypt. While in Egypt, they are enslaved. Now they're going to leave Egypt years later. Okay? This is called the Exodus. What's an Exodus? A mass exit. It's a good vocab word. Please write that down or put it in your brain. You can hear that in a modern day vernacular. There's a mass exodus out of Syria right now. Okay, that means, or there's an exodus out of Syria. That means a mass amount of the population is trying to leave or flee Syria. Fair enough? You see a little squiggly round circle? That is where they're lost in the desert for 40 years. And then you see down here, there's Mount Sinai. That is where Moses gets the 10 Commandments coming up soon. Okay, so Moses leads the exodus, mass exit. They wander in the desert for 40 years. We saw the little squiggly line. And goes to Mount Sinai, gets the 10 Commandments. Okay, and we'll talk more about the 10 Commandments later. So who received the 10 Commandments? 1, 2, 3. Moses. Great. They returned to Canaan, but someone's now living in their land. Okay, it's not their land anymore. During this point, they become known as the Israelites, and that's why the country will be called Israel. Okay, who's the first king? Saul. Saul's the first king of Israelites. And then they have another guy. He's not king yet, but he's a poet warrior. Have you heard the term David versus Goliath? Okay, it's the small guy taking on the big guy, and we use this all the time. And I'm going to show you a video of this in just a minute, and they're going to say the term David and Goliath, and it's a worldwide term. So you need to know what that means. Okay, and so as the story goes, David goes out to face the giant Goliath, and David puts stones, swings them around, boom, hits the stone in the head. Goliath goes down. And then David uses the sword to finish him off. Okay.
He was going from being a kid to being a warrior in that moment.
He just bent over and he picked up 5 smooth stones. And these he put in his pouch. And he picked up his sling and he walked towards Goliath. And Goliath sees him and he goes, "What?"
It was insulting, actually, to send. Well, what are you sending this young, unarmed, unprotected guy against me?
The Philistine curses David and vows to feed the Israelites flesh to the birds and the wild animals. Smack talking is one of his fatal mistakes.
Never brag in a fight. That is one of the basic rules of fighting. David was listening and saying, okay, this guy's talking trash, and as soon as he makes a move, I want to put him down. And that's exactly what he did. You can get a stone of a quarter pound, and a sling can hurl that at a couple of 100 miles an hour. It's like a whip. You know, when you crack a whip, you hear that sound. That's because the tip of the whip is going faster than the speed of sound. It's a sonic boom. It's breaking the sound barrier. That stone can hit with a great degree of speed and a great amount of force.
According to the legend, all it takes to fell the giant is one shot. But for Goliath, the worst is yet to come.
He kills him with his own sword. To add insult to injury.
Is powerful does not deter anyone to file a case against him. If we are deterred from filing because he's powerful, forget it. Don't be optimistic. Don't be pessimistic. Let's all be optimistic. Are you reminded of the case of David and Goliath?
In the communication, they...
Okay. David has a son. It's the next king. King Solomon becomes rich through trade. When you trade equals wealth, basically. Okay, you don't always get wealthy by trading, but in general, when you trade more, you get wealthier. Okay. There's this Temple Mount exercise. You guys have maybe read it already. Here's a little video about the Temple Mount.
The Temple Mount, or the Al-Aqsa compound, has been the site of protests and violence for the past week. This isn't the first time it has been at the center of a crisis. Similar events took place in 2000 and even last year. But why did it start this time around? Last week, 2 Israeli policemen were shot dead in the Temple Mount Plaza by 2 Arab citizens of Israel, using a weapon that was smuggled into the compound. 3 days later, the Israeli authorities installed metal detectors at the entrance to the holy site. Angered by the new security measures Israel imposed, Palestinians refused to go through the metal detectors and began holding mass prayers outside the mosque rather than inside it. The week-long mass prayer and protest then turned violent with clashes over the weekend, in which 4 Palestinians were killed. The escalation continued after a Palestinian stabbed 3 Israelis to death in their home in the settlement of Halamish. But what's so terrible about metal detectors, and how did they get us here? After all, they exist in malls, shops, and cafes. Palestinians see the metal detectors as a symbol of Israel's attempts to break the status quo regarding the Muslim control of the Al-Aqsa compound. Since Israel's occupation of the West Bank in 1967, the site is under Israeli official sovereignty, but is managed by an Islamic religious trust called the Waqf. For Palestinians, it's the one site which is not entirely under Israeli control. It's a place where Muslim Palestinians from across Israel, Jerusalem, the West Bank, and even Gaza get to meet. The Israeli decision to install metal detectors, which are manned by Israeli border police and were put in place without the Waqf's approval, is basically seen as another Israeli checkpoint, like the ones in the West Bank, and as an infringement of the status quo. However, Israel, as the sovereign of Jerusalem, says that the new security measures are only there as a response to the shooting attack and were put in place to make sure no further violence occurs. Furthermore, Israel says it doesn't prevent any Muslim worshippers from actually entering the site, and all are welcome to come in and pray, as long as they agree to the new security measures. To make things even more complicated, some Jews think that they should be allowed to pray on the Temple Mount, which is the Jewish name for the Al-Aqsa compound. The Temple Mount is the holiest site in Judaism, where Jews believe Jerusalem's Holy Temple once stood. According to the status quo, Jews can only visit the compound, but are not allowed to pray there. Today, however, groups of Jews go up to the site, and some even attempt to pray there, which a number of Israeli politicians support. So as you can see, metal detectors are not really the issue. As always, it's a question of sovereignty and control.
Okay, what does monotheism mean? One God. Okay, mono means one. Okay? And then this is part of that, where I was talking about some of the foundations of our Western culture, our Western civilization, their justice system. Okay, strangers deserve justice. Criminals deserve due process. We have incorporated that. In America, you are innocent until proven guilty. We would apply the law to pretty much anybody equally, and that's where this begins. And then look at this, aid the poor. This is different than the caste system. In the caste system, you're poor because you deserve it. It's your dharma, it's your karma, it's your fault. Here, it's maybe not your fault, and people should help the poor. Okay, and so these are just different ways of looking at things. Okay, so we got some new vocab words. Torah, synagogue, Dead Sea Scrolls. Let's go through them. So the Torah is just the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. And it's the books of the law, it's the books of the history. The Dead Sea Scrolls, they were found in these jars by a goat herder in 1947, and it's one of the oldest copies of the Bible that we have. Talmud is commentaries or lessons about the Torah, and you'll see this in Islam as well. There's the Holy Book, and then there's the book about the Holy Book, if that makes sense. And so we're getting into, you've got your religious book, and then a really important book about the religious book. Okay, so that's just what we're seeing there. That's what the Talmud is. So check this map out. This is the Roman Empire. Rome comes up in the next unit or two, but I want you to see that Rome expands out all the way to Israel. And so people that fight against the Romans, the Israelites that are fighting against the Romans, they're going to be called zealots. Okay, they led a revolt against the Romans. The revolt lasts 4 years, but it fails. 1,000 people flee to a mountain fortress. So here's that mountain fortress, Masada. All right. So Rome is camped outside this mountain fortress. They can't really get up. They build a ramp. It takes them years to build this ramp so they can go get these revolt leaders. Here is a quick video about that.
An epic siege. An invincible army.
I will wipe them out of Judea once and for all.
A final stand.
There'll be no retreat from Masada.
The siege of Masada is the Alamo of the ancient world.
900 people committed suicide here at Masada. It's a story of courageous martyrdom, and if the people here were willing to take their own lives in defense of their traditions and their identity.
You have 10,000 Roman soldiers around you, and they want to kill you, and they will if they can.
I can hardly think of any part of the human drama that's not represented here.
So I can come? But is it all just a legend? Or did nearly 1,000 men, women, and children really commit suicide rather than be made the slaves of Rome? It's a 2,000-year-old drama, and it's as compelling today as it has ever been.
Freedom or death! Freedom or death! Freedom or death!
First told at the dawn of Christianity and at a moment of crisis for the Jews, the story of Masada has long fired the imagination of believers and non-believers alike. Yet for most of recorded history, it's been little more than a legend. Then, in the middle of the 20th century, everything changes. An overwhelming body of archaeological evidence is uncovered. A ruined mountain fortress, a siege ramp threatening its walls, a network of fortified Roman camps. Taken together, they pinpoint Masada on the map. This is the indisputable site of an epic contest between the Roman army and a besieged community of Jews. From the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, Masada is an icon for the nation.
Masada's a symbol for Israelis, so they can connect to moments in history.
This becomes the Alamo. You know, remember that Masada shall never fall again. But it also becomes a very human tale about conflict and freedom and determination and resolution and possibility and disappointment.
An almost mythic site, it serves as a mirror to history.
All right, welcome back. We're finishing up, so let's finish strong, okay? Passover, do you remember the Exodus? What's the Exodus? When Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt and up into the land of Canaan. Okay, that's what you're celebrating right around Passover time. And then there's also Rosh Hashanah. Remember we talked about calendar dates a long time ago? In the Jewish calendar, it's year 5,000 or something versus our calendar where it's year 2000. Isn't that interesting? And then we have Hanukkah, and here's a small video about Hanukkah.
Long ago in the land of Israel, in the center of the walled city of Jerusalem, there stood a beautiful temple. Outside of Israel, though, there lived a very wicked man named Antiochus, the king of Syria. The king did not like people who had beliefs different than his own, and so he went around the world forcing his religion on all the people he conquered. When Antiochus and his army invaded Israel and took it over, he decreed that only his gods could be worshipped. He made the Jews swear that they would give up their religion and customs and follow his instead. He also commanded that all of the Jewish temples be converted or destroyed, including the beautiful one in Jerusalem. Those who refused to follow Antiochus' commands were to be severely punished. Some Jews obeyed Antiochus out of fear, but others were brave enough to refuse. Judah Maccabee was one such man. Judah and his brothers were all strong fighters who formed an army of their own to fight King Antiochus and his men. Although they were greatly outnumbered, the Maccabees fought the Syrian army with all their might. With the strength that only comes from fighting for something you truly believe in, Judah and the Maccabees defeated Antiochus and his army and triumphantly reclaimed the temple in Jerusalem. However, when they entered the temple for the first time, they were shocked to see it in shambles. The golden pitchers were all tarnished, the marble floors were cracked, and there was no oil to light the menorah. They began cleaning the temple, removing every sign and symbol of the religion that had been forced upon them by their invaders. As they worked, they found a small container of oil. They all knew the little oil they had would only be enough for one night, but then a miracle took place. Instead of going out, the lamps kept burning and burning. They burned for 8 days and 8 nights, and this way the Maccabees knew God was with them. That is why we celebrate Hanukkah every year, and why we light 8 candles in our menorahs. The end.
All right, that's all for today. Make sure you do the geography quiz that's attached with this video, and then and that's just for your own learning. That's not like graded or anything. And then next class session, there'll be an actual quiz with some questions. Please do that. That is part of your grade. That's it for this lesson. I wish you the best. Take care.